Well, good morning, lords and ladies. Back to another morning with the Lord. As always, I'm your friendly host, Lord Duffield. And today is a lucky day, 13th of the 11th, 2021. Lucky because it's the 13th, of course. And the last episode we did was the 13th too. Ooh, auspicious. Could it mean something? Who knows? Who knows? Well, there's been a few developments over the last couple of days since the last episode. I missed a couple there because I have been trying to move around. I'm currently recording in a different spot. Hopefully there isn't a great deal of background noise. But I can't do too much about that. It should be right. Now, first up, we are talking, as usual, it seems, about China. Just a random little story, well, it seems random, but something that pricks up the ears when you hear it. According to the CNN report here by Laura He and Yong Xiong, Xiong, China is urging families to stock up on food as supply challenges multiply. It says here, China is telling families to stock up on food and other daily essentials as bad weather, energy shortages, and COVID-19 restrictions threaten to disrupt supplies. The country's Ministry of Commerce late Monday issued a notice directing local governments to encourage people to stockpile daily necessities, including vegetables, oils, and poultry, in order to meet the needs of daily life and emergencies. Now, what the bloody hell? Every time I saw this report, I saw it yesterday first, I'm pretty sure. Every time I saw the report, the reason for the needing of residents to stock up on supplies wasn't given. That was the whole mystery behind it. China had told everyone to go out and stock up on food without giving reason. And this one gives a clear reason. Clickbaity titles. People, clickbaity titles. Anyway, we'll keep reading here, see if there's anything of note. It says the agency also urged local authorities to make sure that people have an adequate supply of essentials this winter into next spring. And it told those authorities to keep prices stable, a source of anxiety in recent weeks, as the cost of vegetables has surged throughout China because of unusually heavy rainfall that has hurt crops. China has stressed the importance of shoring up food and other daily supplies in the past, including in September, ahead of a major week-long holiday period. But those statements are usually very obvious, intended for local authorities to read, and rarely capture the attention of everyday citizens. The inclusion of language in this statement that mentions families, though, appears to be putting people on edge. The sudden warning sent shockwaves through Chinese social media on Tuesday, as many people speculate about the Commerce Ministry's rationale. The government didn't even tell us to stock goods when the COVID outbreak erupted in early 2020, wrote one Weibo user responding to the news. Another speculated that authorities were reminding people that they might not be able to afford vegetables this winter. So strong was the reaction that some within Chinese state media sought to quell concerns. Hu Qijing, the editor of the Global Times, a state-run tabloid, dismissed suggestions that the notice could be connected with rising tensions between Beijing and Taipei. China considers Taiwan an inseparable part of its territory, even though the Chinese Communist Party has never ruled the self-governing island. The state-owned economic daily, meanwhile, wrote Tuesday that the authorities were attempting to remind families to prepare in case of temporary lockdowns caused by COVID-19. And state broadcaster CCTV said that the portion of the announcement calling on families to stock up on necessities had been overread. It also released an interview with Zhu Xiaoliang, a Commerce Ministry official, who said that daily supplies for people are sufficient and can be fully guaranteed. Zhu added that the announcement was intended for local authorities. China has maintained a stringent zero-COVID policy, even as countries around the world gradually open up and learn to live with the coronavirus. The world's second-largest economy is resolute on completely eradicating the virus within its borders, and has implemented tough restrictions to stop outbreaks, including stopping high-speed trains and quarantining passengers, and changing traffic lights to red to discourage traffic in one country where a single case was reported. China's strict measures even went viral over the weekend after a single confirmed case of coronavirus sent Shanghai Disneyland into a snap lockdown. Crowds in one video were shown lining up in front of makeshift testing sites as health workers in full personal protective equipment looked on. Nationwide efforts to curb coronavirus cases may be contributing in part to the rising cost of food, according to Wang Hongkong, an official with the Beijing Municipal Commerce Bureau. He said last week at a press conference that the cost of transiting across regions could rise because of strict containment measures. Well, no shit. I think we're starting to get into we're just trying to get into some economic talk about what might be costing China money. But, of course, this is going to be, dealing with the coronavirus would be increasing costs because people would have to spend more time making sure everything's alright. It's undoubtable. No surprise there. But still, someone mentioned, they weren't even told to stock up on supplies in other circumstances that would have been considered more serious. Now, got a little video that I would like to share with everyone. I can't actually show the video, of course, but I can play it for you all to listen. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. just give me a second
Now,
here.
in an attempt to
But the main reason that China's story, the reason, it's saying that they couldn't, weren't sure why China was doing it was the most surprising thing, because as we all know, we've been covering the tension between the global megapowers. It's not in the best of states. Now, the video I'm going to show is from Dr. John Campbell, who puts up series of videos on YouTube here. Like, I've only come across him this last sort of week, but his videos are very, very helpful. He's straight to the facts, and in this video that I'm going to show, he is reviewing the Pfizer's new drug and reviewing a report put out by themselves after tests and whatnot. These are the reports that the doctors sort of have access to. I'm pretty sure they're public as well. It's just, him being a doctor, he's in the know. But yeah, this might be a long one, but I think it's important. I'll leave a link also, because, yes, I think everyone should check this guy's videos out. I'm just loading her up here. Alright.
Warm welcome to today's talk. It's Tuesday the 9th of November. Now, yesterday we looked at Pfizer's new antiviral drug that shows very high levels of efficacy in preventing serious disease, hospitalisation and people dying, which was interesting. And that drug works in a particular way. It has a particular, what we call a pharmacodynamic action. It works in a particular way. But there's another generic drug called ivermectin that you might have heard of that works in exactly a same way as that. Now, no one's saying that information has been deliberately suppressed for years while millions of people have died. But what we are going to show on this video is conclusive proof from the literature that this modality of action is the same. So if you're up for that, stick around. It's not an easy watch, but I've broken it down as much as I can. Now, just before we crack into that, we need to look at what's happening. So when a virus, in this case SARS coronavirus 2, gets into a cell, what happens is it makes lots of proteins. It starts off making proteins, and these proteins are long proteins. So that's one long protein there. There's another long protein there, made out of hundreds of amino acids, sometimes a few thousand amino acids, all strung together. Now, the problem is with these long proteins is they're too long for the job that's required. So it's a bit like a building site, a big log of wood arrives. It needs to be trimmed down into bits that fit in your door frames and your window frames. So this needs to be trimmed down. So these proteins need to be trimmed down. Now, how do we trim down a protein, of course, is the question. Well, it has to be done in a biochemical way. And the way it's done, particularly in SARS coronavirus 2, is there's an enzyme called 3CL protease. Now, protease is an enzyme which breaks down protein. So this is 3CL protease, and that will break down proteins. It's what we call proteolytic. And it will take these long proteins and it will chop them into shorter proteins. It's what we call an endopeptidase. So now, instead of having one long protein, we've got two short ones, and these fit together just nicely to the new virus that we're trying to make. Whereas before it was far too long; it had to be chopped. So that is the protease. Now, these new drugs are what we call protease inhibitors. They stop the protease from working. So here's my protease here. That's my 3CL protease that chops up my proteins into the right length. And a protease inhibitor is a bit like this tape, and it's going to stop the protease from working. So there we go. We've now inhibited the action of the protease. It's now inhibited. So what I'm going to do now is I have a long protein here. So that one's okay, we've done that one. So that fits in nicely into the virus. But now there's another long protein here that needs processed. So the protease, the 3CL protease, comes along, ready to chop this up into shape. And, I can't open it now. So what we've done is we've bounded up the active site of the protease. And that's what these drugs do. They bind the active site of the protease and they stop the protease from working. That means they stop the protease from chopping up the big proteins into smaller proteins, into these strings of amino acids, so they can't build the virus. So it inhibits viral replication, these protease inhibitors. So that's kind of what is happening here. Now, this is the new Pfizer medication here that's just come out. New Pfizer antiviral. But we're going to compare it with ivermectin in this video. A pharmacodynamic analysis by me. Pharmacodynamics is how the pharmacy works, how the drug works in affecting the body. Now, this is the new Pfizer molecule here. This is the new drug. And this is the shape of it here. So it's got 3 fluorides there, so it's interesting. That's the shape of the molecule, fair enough. Now, this is a new molecule, well, certainly on me, but I'm no molecular expert. But so here we have, for example, ritonavir, which was an old antiviral drug that we've been using since 1996, and which in fact will be given with the new one to work together. So we can see that I think we can see that they're different shaped molecules, can't we? There's no F's on this one, for example. So that's the different molecule. So if this molecule was patented, and this is a new molecule, this molecule will be out of patent, even though it has similar actions. Then if we look at ivermectin, which is also out of patent, of course, can't make any money out of ivermectin, then where is it? There we go. So that's the ivermectin molecule there, and we see that's a completely different shape to this new Pfizer molecule here. So they're completely different looking molecules. So as a completely different looking molecule, I would imagine that that's absolutely fine to patent that, because it's a new molecule. And when you patent a drug, you can make money out of it for the next 20 years after the patent date in most jurisdictions. Of course, by the time the drug gets to market, it's often a bit less than that, but that's the sort of time when you can make some serious money out of these things. Now, first of all, this is the new Pfizer drug here, the PF0732. It's designed to block the activity of the SARS coronavirus 2 3CL protease. 3CL protease. So that 3CL protease now won't work, it won't open, so I can't chop my proteins into the correct length to build a nice new virus. Now, evidence for that, because we always have to give the evidence for that is in this paper that we looked at yesterday. So check it out, and there's evidence for that there. That is them saying exactly how this new drug is going to work. That's the site there. So we now know what a protease is. It breaks down proteins into the right length. A protease inhibitor stops the protease from doing that, therefore the proteins remain too long. And a 3CL protease is a protease that makes SARS coronavirus 2. And of course a 3CL protease inhibitor will stop it from making SARS coronavirus 2. Therefore is antiviral. Now I'm pretty sure that all makes sense. So if you haven't quite got that bit, do just go back and watch it again, because that's how it works. Now the CL, this stands for chymotrypsin-like protease, 3CL, 3-chymotrypsin-like protease. Now everyone, of course, in human biology has heard of chymotrypsin. It's a pancreas release. It's an enzyme released by the pancreas to digest protein. It chops proteins up. So it's a protein chopping up enzyme. So this protein, this chymotrypsin-like protease inside the virus is working in a very similar way to the chymotrypsin that your pancreas produces to digest your proteins. Now, going on to the first evidence I want to give. Now, the first evidence comes from this paper here. So we're going to be looking at this paper here, available. You can check it out for yourself. I always paste the links, of course, because you don't want to believe what I say. We have to go by the evidence. Identification of SARS coronavirus 2, 3-chymotrypsin-like protease inhibitors, which we now know. Remember, the inhibitor is the piece of sellotape that stops the enzyme from working, or the scotch tape, or whatever you call it. That's the sticky tape that stops it from working. That's what's clogged this up, and I just can't work these scissors now. Completely useless to chop up my proteins. So this is a quantitative high throughput screening. So this was looking for compounds that could do this. This was done back on the 3rd of September 2020. So here they screened all these compounds. They did a high confirmation screen. they did a finer screen for these compounds, and the activity of anti-SARS coronavirus 2 viral infection was confirmed in 7 of the 23 compounds. So they found 7 compounds that were worth looking at that would have this protease inhibiting effect. And this paper also helpfully gives another explanation of it, hopefully the same as mine, but there it is here. So here's the chain of amino acids forming the protein. But that one's far too long, so it's got to be chopped by that little pair of scissors there, which is the protease. That's the scissors of the protease, of course, and it chops it up into 2 bits, which are nice virus-sized protein chunks that can be used in the door frames and window frames or whatever anatomical molecular architecture is required for the virus. So that was screening compounds. Now, next there was a lot of papers on analysing these. So this is microscopic interactions between ivermectin and key human and viral proteins involved in SARS coronavirus 2 infection. Now, obviously, you want the evidence for this. You're not going to take my word for it. Here it is. It's on this paper here from no less than the Royal Society of Chemistry. And again, thankfully, all these are available. And if you're a biochemist, you'll understand that. If not, you'll just get the gist the same as me. But I think we have got the gist. Now, that's the reference for that one there. The strength and persistence of the interaction between ivermectin and the binding site of the 3CL protease indicate that a partial inhibition of the catalytic activity, in other words, the way that the enzyme works, could have a place as the drug interactions with the main subdomain that define the enzyme define the enzyme binding pocket. Now, the enzyme binding pocket, of course, the protease is an enzyme. So what it's saying here is, so the enzyme's obviously not like a pair of scissors, but if we imagine it's like a pair of scissors, so imagine it's got kind of a blade there, and it's got a bit goes around there, and kind of another blade there. Well, the enzyme binding pocket is that the substrate will bind into that bit there and hold the substrate while it gets chopped up. But if you block that up with something, so for example, if you block that up with ivermectin, that no longer works. That's what it means. So it's telling us how this is working to block the activity of the 3CL protease. That's what that paper's about, and it makes perfect sense if you do take a bit of time to read it. Now, the next paper is this one, again giving you all the evidence, identification of 3-chymotrypsin-like protease inhibitors as potential anti-SARS coronavirus 2 agents. Don't worry if you're not getting all the terminology, I don't always get it myself, but that's this paper here. Out of 13 OTDs, now OTDs, this is called off-target drugs, so ivermectin wasn't originally one of the antivirals they were looking at. They were looking at other existing antivirals. So that's why they're calling it an off-target drug there. But out of 13 off-target drugs, only ivermectin completely blocked, actually blocked by 80%, the 3CL protease activity at this particular concentration of ivermectin. Now, if we look at this compared to the other drugs, this is particularly useful. So here's all the other drugs that were testing along the bottom here. So they were testing all of these medicines along the bottom here. That's what they were testing. And this is the percentage of 3CL enzymic activity present. So the shorter these bits, the more the enzyme was inhibited. So we see that this here, GC3227, that inhibited the enzyme a lot. So the enzyme couldn't chop up the proteins. I don't know what that is. It's not mentioned because it might be toxic. And anyway, all these other ones didn't inhibit it very much, but ivermectin inhibited it a lot. So the ivermectin from this study is greatly inhibiting the ability of the pair of scissors, the 3CL protein, to open. Therefore, it can't chop up the proteins. Therefore, you can't make new virus. So that is what that paper is saying. Development, validation, and approval of COVID-19 specific drugs takes years, this paper also says. Therefore, the idea of drug repurposing, drugs that are used for other purposes, also known as repurposing, is an important strategy to control the sudden outbreak of life-threatening infectious agents that spread rapidly. We agree completely. Drugs can be repurposed much more quickly than we can develop new drugs, because we already have a pretty good view of the safety profile, the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of the drug. The kinetics being the way that the body interacts with the drug, and the dynamics being the way that the drug affects the body. Right, next paper, next line of evidence here is from this paper here. Again, Royal Society of Chemistry, no less, and all the details are there on that paper as well. So again, feel free to check that out if you would like to. It's all there. Let me give you the gist of what it's saying. From the docking analysis, that's the way that the drug docks into the enzymes, the way that the drug binds up the scissors in this case. From the docking analysis, ivermectin showed the highest docking score with an average energy of minus 8.5 kilocalories per mole. I don't know the units, I don't pretend to know it. But it means it bound on quite tightly among all compounds. So it showed the highest docking score. In other words, it cluttered up the enzyme. It cluttered up the 3CL enzymes and stopped it working better than all of the other compounds that they looked at. Remdesivir showed the lowest binding energy and highest docking score. So remdesivir doesn't work very well now on this particular analysis anyway. Now here we have some information about remdesivir, which of course has been used for critically ill patients quite a lot. I put this up here because we notice it's £340 a vial. £340 a vial. That's the indicative price that the UK is paying. So that's the link for that from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. So pretty expensive drug. I believe in the United States the course costs about $3,000 for a 4 or 5 day course, can't remember. Anyway, really expensive. And of course we know ivermectin is available through the World Health Organization at 6 cents. 6 cents. 6 cents, about 5 English pennies a tablet. So it's a bit cheaper. And from this data, higher docking score, higher cluttering up ability of the enzyme. Moving on to the next piece of evidence. We've only got a couple more, so stick with it. It is worth it. This is from Future Virology. So this evidence comes from exploring the binding efficacy of ivermectin against key proteins of SARS coronavirus 2, pathogenesis, and in silico approach. Now this is very interesting. In silico means this is computer modelled. Now this is incredibly clever and way beyond my ability. It's computerized molecular modelling, but it's a very well recognised science these days. So let's see what this is saying from the future of virology. We have documented an intense binding of both ivermectin B1A. That's the type of ivermectin in the drug, and that's the type of ivermectin that's similar, but not in the tablets. But these are the two natural forms that were first identified by William Campbell and Satoshi Amuro, for which they won the Nobel Prize. So we've documented an intense binding effect of both ivermectin and this to the main protease with a high binding energy, is all that means. In other words, the ivermectin well and truly clogs up the 3CL protease, stops it from cutting up the long protein chains into smaller protein chains, therefore it stops the viruses being made. So just as a reminder, given that with this evidence, this was from the original Pfizer paper, it is working this way because the original Pfizer paper says that the new Pfizer medication is designed to block the activity of the SARS coronavirus 2, 3-chymotrypsin-like protease. In other words, it acts the same way as the sellotape round the pair of scissors, as indeed we have given evidence for ivermectin doing. Now we could give many other examples. I might just give I'll give one other brief example here, I think, because I don't want to get too close. So just briefly, this evidence here is from this paper here. Always give the evidence. Frontiers in Microbiology, published in January 2021. Again, all the information there, and you can download the PDF, download the article. It's great that these are all freely available, which is just brilliant. molecular docking reveals ivermectin and remdesivir as potential repurposed drugs against SARS coronavirus 2, this paper said. Don't take my word for it, check it out, that's what it says. Right, with SARS coronavirus 2, now, first of all, the ivermectin inhibits the spike protein, this is saying. So, as we know, the spike protein in the virus here, the spike protein has to fit into the ACE2 receptor site on the cell surface in order to get into the cell. So this is saying that the ivermectin clogs up the spike protein. It no longer fits because that's got to be a perfect fit. So with SARS coronavirus 2 spike protein, ivermectin showed a high binding affinity. In other words, that hung on good and tight. It bound it, and that would stop the spike protein from infecting the cell. Ivermectin showed a high binding affinity to the spike protein, as well as the human cell surfaces receptor of the ACE2. So and that's the other one that it can bind into there. So in other words, not only does it clog up that, it clogs up this as well. Therefore, it's a double reason not to fit. So, in other words, this is the key here, isn't it? That's the key. And this is the lock. So
alright, we might leave that there. But as you can hear, old mate seems to know what he's talking about. I'll leave a link to his video, and his channel's just Dr. John Campbell. Campbell, Campbell. Yes, very, very interesting stuff there, as none of us are. Oh, well, I know, not none of us, of course, there's probably someone out there that might listen, but, you know, I have no idea about that sort of thing, and I find it rather interesting. I thought I'd share that with you all. Now, next up here, we have reports about Russia moving towards the Ukrainian border, which I think I spoke about in the last podcast. Either way, you know, that situation hasn't changed. And this report is from DW, Made for Minds, DW.com. It starts off with the title of the report is US asks Russia to explain Ukrainian border provocations. Reports of Russian troops massing near the Ukrainian border and in Crimea are credible, the US said on Monday. It said Moscow needs to explain these provocations. The US State Department called on Russia to refrain from escalating tensions with Ukraine. In comments to reporters on Monday, Russia has reportedly amassed troops and moved tanks near the Ukrainian border in recent days, as a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine looks increasingly shaky. The movements are the latest point of tension between Russia and the US less than 3 months after US President Joe Biden took office. We call on Russia to refrain from escalatory actions, State Department spokesman Ned Price said. Price said the United States would be concerned by any effort by Moscow to intimidate Ukraine, whether it occurred on Russian territory or within Ukraine. He declined to say whether the US believes Russia is preparing to invade the former Soviet Republic. We asked Russia for an explanation of these provocations, Price said, but more importantly, what we have signalled with our Ukrainian partners is a message of reassurance. The State Department briefing follows President Biden's first call with Ukrainian President Zelensky on Friday. In their conversation, Biden affirmed Washington's support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in the face of Russia's ongoing aggression. Through Europe, US forces raised the alert status in response to recent escalations of Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. Why do they just repeat themselves? Bloody hell. Last July, all sides to the conflict agreed on a ceasefire in the eastern Donbass area. But starting in mid-February, increased fighting has further undermined an already fragile peace in the region. Since 2014, at least 13,000 people have been killed in the ongoing conflict. What is NATO's position? Question mark. The call between two leaders came after the NATO alliance expressed concern over what is said was a large Russian military build-up on Ukraine's eastern border, warning Moscow against any further escalations of the situation. NATO will continue to support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We remain vigilant and continue to monitor the situation very closely, a NATO spokesperson told German newspaper Die Welt, which I think is The Welt. I don't know what Welt means in German. The destabilizing actions on the part of Russia undermined efforts to de-escalate tensions under the OSCE brokered July 2020 ceasefire and agreement, the NATO spokesperson said. The alliance would continue to support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, he added. And what about EU and UK's response? European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell expressed concern on Sunday after a phone call with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, in which he pledged the bloc's unwavering support for Kiev. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday also said that the UK has significant concerns over Russian activity in Crimea and on the Ukrainian border. The Prime Minister reaffirmed our unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Johnson's office said. He expressed his solidarity with President Zelensky's government in the face of this destabilizing activity and commended Ukraine's approach to the situation. He said the UK would work to ensure there is no further escalation. In a tweet after the call, Zelensky thanked Johnson for his support and said the Ukraine was not alone and was supported by the G7 nations. Isn't it weird how Twitter's taken off? I mean, I started a Twitter for my Lord Duffield page, and I think I tweeted a couple of times, but I found it, I don't know, different. I got no interest in reading little blurbs that people put up unless it's something of note, which politicians talking about day-to-day policy and politics is something of note. It's just so weird that they do that. I mean, we up President Trump for being a Twitter hound, but everybody else seems to be doing it as well. I haven't seen really any Australian politicians' Twitter feeds, but I'm sure they're out there. But yes, I thought we should cover this story because, as you know, I think it's pretty important. The last thing we want is war with either Russia or China. So, the moving of troops onto the Ukrainian border at the same point as we have all these issues going on with China, and I think it's Taiwan at the moment, is some pretty telling stuff. I'm doing my best to try and reduce the amount of swearing on the episode. Yeah, it's probably not the best way to approach talking about the news, even though it's so enjoyably fun. But to increase, listener enjoyment, I thought I should probably refrain from calling a bunch of people a bunch of C words. We've got one more story up for you all here today. It's from the ABC and it's titled Dr. Charles Perkins' Memorial Oration Keynote Speech Sees Tony McAvoy, SC Advocate for Truth Commissions and Treaties. Tony McAvoy, SC, the country's most senior Aboriginal barrister, used the 2021 Charles Perkins Memorial Oration to advocate for the establishment of truth commissions and treaties with Australia's First Peoples, labelling the often used assertion that Aboriginal people should stop living in the past as not possible. Our past, our connection to these lands and waters is such a profoundly spiritual affair that our identity and well-being depends on the maintenance and transmissions of these connections, Mr. McAvoy said. Since 2000, Dr. Charles Perkins' Oration and Prize, hosted by the University of Sydney, has provided a distinguished platform for the discussion of race relations in Australia. The event has also allowed for perceived injustices and inequalities experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be brought to the attention of the broader Australian public, just as was achieved in 1965, when Charles Perkins led a bus tour across New South Wales, known as the Freedom Rides. I've never heard of that. Interesting. I'll have to look into it. Inspired by the American civil rights movement, the Freedom Rides provided a glimpse into the poor state of Aboriginal health, education, and housing in remote and regional communities. Charles Perkins was an extraordinary person, a person who achieved greatness in his lifetime and stood at the front line of our conflicts with the government and the racists in this country, Mr. McAvoy said. Stops in Walgett, where Aboriginal people could not enter the RSL, and Moree, which excluded Aboriginal children from swimming in the local pool, attracted national media coverage. Through his outspoken and sometimes controversial advocacy, Charles Perkins challenged Australia to confront its own history that he felt it was previously unwilling to do, sparking debate and opportunities for change. How much does that resonate with now? The problem is people unwilling to acknowledge changes needed. And that's what we fall for now. And then we start running on with all this fucking shit that really gives us a sense of being able to make a difference, but we still aren't quite aware of the differences we need to make ourselves. Continuing on here. His legacy lives on through his contributions to education, sport, housing, and public life, Mr. McAvoy said. in recent years encouraging the broader Australian public to take an interest in Indigenous affairs has proven both difficult and problematic, commonly punctuated by calls for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to take personal agency and forge successful and prosperous lives within modern Australia. There's a quote here. At present, we are told that our recovery from the trauma of our dispossession is largely our own responsibility, that we should stop living in the past. Mr. McAvoy would use his address to push back against such statements by outlining the intergenerational impacts of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander dispossession. The post-colonial history of the Kalkadoon people of northwest Queensland, the paternal ancestry country of Charles Perkins, was central to Mr. McAvoy's oration as he outlined the parallel yet entirely disparate experiences of Kalkadoon people to that of European settlers. Following the attempted eradication of the Kalkadoon, Mount Isa became a prosperous regional centre where the British could engage in mining and grazing without fear, Mr. McAvoy said. The territory of the Kalkadoon people is a vast tract of land in what is known as the northwestern Queensland, as which includes the inland city of Mount Isa. Their country straddles the Leichhardt River and includes the Selwyn Range to the east. A barrister specialising in native title and human rights, and the country's first Indigenous silk, Mr. McAvoy worked with the Kalkadoon people as counsel for their native title claim in the late 2000s. It was during the 1860s that the British came to understand that there was copper oxide in Mount Isa area. After being shown by some Kalkadoon people, the British took up government grants to tenure on the lands of the Kalkadoon, and conflict ensued, Mr. McAvoy said. In an effort to protect their land, the Kalkadoon used a very successful form of guerrilla warfare, engaging in surprise attacks and then retreating in the Rocky Mountain range where the British could not find them. In 1884, as tensions continued to escalate, native police troops stationed at Normanton massacred the Kalkadoon people in a dawn raid now known as the Battle Mountain Massacre. Approximately 900 Kalkatungu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Kalkatungu, were killed in that battle, and the 6 years prior, Mr. McAvoy said. During the Kalkadoon's native title claim, Mr. McAvoy heard perspectives of these events from an elder who had been told firsthand of the Battle Mountain Massacre by his grandmother. The two sides of the battle, I want to just stop there. You know, we try and put so much separation, but, you know, this person's grandmother, who they had met as a child, was there for that. It's not so far removed as people like to think it is. The two sides of the battle had very different trajectories following Battle Mountain. The Kalkadoon people were largely massacred, with survivors significantly displaced and living lives of destitution and oppression. And the British side, well, their lives flourished, Mr. McAvoy said. In December 2011, the Kalkadoon people had their native title rights recognised by the Federal Court of Australia, providing them with decision-making powers over land use, economic development, and care of the environment. Frontier violence and colonial tension is a familiar story for Indigenous people and communities nationwide who all bear the scars of dispossession in some form or another. In recent years, there has been a growing acceptance and willingness to better understand the nuances of Australia's shared history. But Mr. McAvoy said Indigenous perspectives have historically been overlooked by mainstream institutions and teachings. It is a story that deserves to hold a position in the national narrative alongside the Gallipoli and Kokoda track. It should be part of the national school curriculum, but it is not, Mr. McAvoy said. And I can attest to that. Like I said, I've never heard of this. I mean, in school a lot of us watched Rabbit Proof Fence, which is one of the only sort of movies about this sort of thing. And, you know, we might have looked at a couple of cases, but yeah, you hear very little of any sort of resistance or fighting, you know, or us killing. Or, you know, not us, the British. That, yeah, this is something that not only should be learnt, it's a part of history. Whitewashing anything is not a good idea. Let's continue, because I want to hear about what their plans to do in the future are. To combat this absence, Mr. McAvoy is proposing the implementation of social structures in the form of truth and treaty commissions. The gap between exploitive destruction of the landscape in the name of the economy and the deep spirituality of our First Nations is far too great. Social structures need to be built to allow us to be safe and happy and allow us to shape our own destiny. Absolutely, he said. Truth-telling commissions are formal bodies tasked with discovering and revealing past wrongdoings in the hope of resolving conflict and repairing relationships. However, Aboriginal stories of survival, success and aspiration are also to be shared. They will lay bare the truths that have been hidden from white Australia but are known by First Nations, Mr. McAvoy said. It remains unclear how Mr. McAvoy's proposals would operate or be implemented by Victoria's URUC Justice Commissions is one example of a seemingly workable model. The Truth-Telling Commissions is an agreement between the Victorian Government and the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, an elected representative body of traditional owners and other Victorian Aboriginal people. It's expected to hand down its interim report in June 2022. In months ahead, there is sure to be further pressure to explain how truth-telling and treaty are more than symbolic gestures which will do little to improve the social economic standing of Indigenous people. But in the meantime, Mr. McAvoy is resolute in pressing ahead with a sentiment similar to that of Perkins, one of self-determination, governance and community control. It cannot be that we continue to see our people dying of preventable disease, incarcerated at shocking rates, impoverished and treated like some inferior class. It is time to move beyond the colony. There you go. I'm going to leave that as closing thoughts, I think that is prudent. I thank you all for joining me on today's episode. Once again, I'm your loyal host, Lord Duffield, and you've been listening to A Morning with the Lord. And just as a final thought again, I will repeat that last quote. It cannot be that we continue to see our people dying of preventable disease, incarcerated at shocking rates, impoverished and treated like some inferior class. It is time to move beyond the colony.